Hello, and welcome back to Historical Biography. And today we're going to be talking about the Grand Conqueror, Genghis Khan, who created the largest contiguous land empire in the history of Earth. So we're going to talk a little bit about him and his kind of influence on things and how he got started. Let's get going. So first of all, we got to know who this guy is. Who was Genghis Khan? Well, Genghis was born in 1158 and was the founder of the Mongolian Empire by uniting the various nomadic tribes in Mongolia. See, just like kind of how in the United States there were many different Native American tribes, there were lots of different Mongolian tribes in the Asian steppe. And so Genghis united all these various tribes together into one force. And then he would go on to launch the Mongol invasions that would establish, like I said, the largest contiguous empire in history. And Khan's campaigns were known for being destructive and resulted in millions of deaths. So he was particularly violent, and he wasn't afraid to kill civilians. Where was he from? Well, he was from the Mongolian steppes, which is a temperate hilly grassland. This is kind of what it looks like out here. He was born into a nomadic lifestyle, meaning his family and tribe traveled around the steppes, and they didn't stay in one place all the time. They were always moving. The steppe is in Mongolia and Upper China, so it's kind of right above where China is, if you can imagine that on the map. Let's talk a little bit about that life that he was born into. Like I said, they always travel, and they live in these things called yurts, which are these big circular tents that can be easily taken apart and assembled. So you can travel easily with these tents. And since the yurts can be carried easily, right, horses and their care are essential for the tribes Genghis was a part of. So they relied a lot on horses. And the Mongolian army reflected this. So the Mongolian army relied heavily on horseback riders with short bows, as well as other things. They used all sorts of different, military weapons and tactics, but Mongolians were known for horseback riding. This allowed the army to strike quickly, retreat hastily, and strike from a distance. So these armies were used to living life on the move, and they were capable of moving from target to target quickly because they were just used to moving around all the time. So let's talk a little bit about Genghis's conquests and kind of the way that he got to this empire that he created. So at the beginning, he did have to unite the Mongol plains, and he struggled to control the other tribes that resisted his rule. Some of them he managed to get to join him without fighting. Others he had to subdue with weapons. Tribes that did not unite with him, he was forced to subdue militarily. And he ended up adapting strategies so that he could defeat different enemies. For instance, he ended up using siege weapons from China at one point, and he utilized an extensive spy network to spy on his enemies so that he could learn about them and kind of how they ticked. After he united the Mongolian tribes, he did invade the Jia dynasty in China in 1205, and over the next several years wore them down, eventually taking them over. Not completely taking over. By invading the Jia, he was able to gain a tribute-paying vassal. So basically, he was getting a source of income from this kingdom that he was subdued. From there, he ended up invading the Jin dynasty as well in China, because at this point, China did not have one unified ruler. There were several different government polities at the time. So Genghis was fighting this new Chinese kingdom. He was able to rout the Jin armies at Yelung. And finally, in 1234, they had fully conquered the Jin. So after about 20 years, he was able to do all of that. Now, once he had conquered the Jia and the other Chinese groups that were close to him, he then realized that one of his former tribal rivals had escaped Mongolia and conquered this area over to the west, which he called KaraKitai. And the Mongols then ended up going to defeat that Khanate, mostly for revenge. And so he quickly fomented unrest in the kingdom, and then afterwards attacked and defeated it. After that, he moved on to the Karazimian Empire. They were originally trading partners with the Mongols, but there were some injustices done to Genghis's men, 3 of his ambassadors were harassed, and then the Shah that led this empire beheaded one of them and sent them all back. And so he brought together 10,000 men and conquered the empire because he just wasn't going to stand for that kind of thing. Not really Genghis's deal, allowing things like that to happen. After that, he made it to the Caucus, and he defeated Georgia, Crimea, the Rus, and Bulgaria. How did he do this? Well, he had conquested this empire, and so on the way back, they divided themselves into 2 different forces. One force went south through Afghanistan and India to go back to Mongolia, and the other half went north to Russia, Georgia, and Eastern Europe, conquering along the way. So let's talk a little bit about his legacy. When he was finally done doing all of the conquering he had done, this was all the different areas in which he had gone through, as you can see following these arrows. And he had conquered a lot of territory. Was this the extent of the empire that he had created? No. His followers, his children, would go on to conquer more. But just for what he was doing, right, he set the way to create this large Mongolian empire. After his death, his empire ended up being divided into 4 separate kingdoms. So there was the Empire of the Great Khan, which was China and Eastern Asia. So he basically established a new Chinese empire, but under Mongolian rule. There was the Mongol homeland of Mongolia, which was under somebody else's control. And then there was the Kingdom of Chagatai, which was Central Asia and Northern Iran. And then finally, the Golden Horde, which was in the Russian/Eastern European area. And each Khanate lasted for a really long time. For instance, the Golden Horde Khan ruled Russia until 1502, so over 250 years, Russia was ruled by Mongols. Pretty impressive for the time period. Now, like any ruler, though, there are obviously many different perceptions of Genghis Khan. There are some people, right, who were not very thrilled with him. Other people, right, thought he was great. For instance, some people who thought of him positively were the Mongols themselves. They celebrated him and revered him as this great leader, and he still is today. The Mongolia does still revere Genghis Khan. He's kind of like their George Washington, so he's kind of a big deal to them. And he was celebrated by the European leaders that he had run into that he did not conquer. So he was kind of well known. They didn't really know about all the other stuff he had done in Asia. They thought of him as kind of this respectful, great general kind of guy. Now in China, the Khan's legacy is kind of mixed, right? He did a lot of great things for China, and the dynasty created from his line did some pretty good things. But, also he conquered them, right? And so that's not great. There are kind of this mixed legacy in China when it comes to the Khans. Negatively, right, Russia and most modern accounts talk of Genghis kind of like being a mass murderer and being a devastating warlord and tyrant. So, right, these places don't particularly like him. But just like any ruler, right, people are going to have different opinions of you based on your actions and how you treat them as a group or individually. Thanks so much again for watching Historical Biography. It's been great teaching you about different people and places and whatnot. Once again, just like every other time, if you want to comment something you want to learn about, go on ahead and drop a comment down below, and I'll be sure to make a video of that. I want to make sure I can make videos that are tailored to the people who are watching them. So if you're watching stuff and you're like, oh, I want to learn about this, don't be afraid to drop a comment. We'll make sure that happens. And then, of course, like, subscribe, ring the bell, and then you'll know when all the videos that I release are coming, and you can watch them. So thanks again for learning about Genghis Khan, and we'll see you next time with more historical biography.